should see that little recording button on the top there.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. And I'm going to make sure we're going live on YouTube.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. So feel free to, on the participants list, raise your hand or use the yes and no buttons if you would like to speak up. And I will go ahead and unmute Sue, since we're going to talk about most of the enterprise funds. So in front of you, you have the water fund, which is on pages 54 through 56. A couple things I wanted to mention. You see the forecast for the next 5 years based on our assumptions as of right now. I should note that the financial policies of the city is to hold a 90-day reserve policy. So that is the orange line that you see there. The blue bars are the ending fund balance. That the graph is also showing only a 1% growth rate. So that is not taking into consideration any rate increases or changes that the city council may or may not make in the future. So what's in there is just a 1% growth rate. Other than that, Sue, did you want to talk about anything in the water fund that we have going on?
We're kind of quiet in the water fund. We're doing a project right now, replacing some undersized water lines, and we intend to do a similar project next year. But that's about all. We don't have a lot of unusual things going on with anything in that fund. Are you talking the entire water fund, Matt, or
yeah,
specifically distribution?
No, we can talk about the entire water fund.
Okay, so at the water filtration facility, they are in the process of upgrading all of their computer equipment, which the majority of is equipment that they have had in place since the facility opened in 2006. So it's a little bit outdated, to say the least. Along with that, they are updating their SCADA, which is the control system that operates the plant. And so that project is reflected in the water filtration facility budget. But other than that, pretty much everything is business as usual.
Yeah, neither of the two departments that are in the water fund really changed a whole heck of a lot as far as personnel services or materials and services. And then you have the debt service that's on there. You'll notice in the enterprise funds that I do have what I would consider a little bit higher than normal contingency amount in the water, sewer, and storm funds. And the reason for that is for any potential development that may happen that we need to use resources for, whether that would be something on the riverfront or something. Obviously, we just don't know when that project is going to hit. It could be next week. It could be 2 years from now. So I wanted to make sure and have some money at least appropriated and available if those projects do come to fruition sooner rather than later. Garrett, did you have a question?
Yes, on the fund balance available, should that be equal to the ending fund balance from this fiscal year?
It is. It's kind of a guess right now, though. So I do my best to try and estimate what the ending fund balance is going to be for next year. Ultimately, it's the auditors that will determine that, and that gets entered into the budget around December, January timeframe when the audit gets complete.
So the ending ending fund balance for this fiscal year, it is not necessarily where it's actually going to be.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It is, as of right now, it's kind of a best guess until we actually end the year. And then the auditors come in around September, October and start working. And then December and January, I get the actual ending fund balance.
Okay.
Any other questions on the water fund?
I have wondering with the way that if the federal government is changing rules, anything in the wind about changes we're going to have to respond to, or is it quiet now, Sue?
No, when we did the water filtration facility, which now has been about almost 15 years ago, we looked ahead to see what type of regulations were being considered, and we made sure that the plant exceeded those, even the ones that were going to be implemented or were being considered to be implemented over the next couple of decades. So we haven't heard anything new that would require any sort of system upgrades from what we already have. We're really leading edge technology on that part.
Good.
Seeing no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the sewer fund. So that is on pages 58 through 61. So once again, the same kind of forecast with a 1% growth rate. In the blue bars moving forward in the forecast, the 90-day reserve policy, which is the orange line. For those of you who don't know, and you might see this little, Indian fund balance raise up and then go down. This is the fiscal year that it was decided that we were going to split out the sewer and the storm fund into separate funds when they used to be combined. So when we did that, there was no prior history tracking of the ending fund balance of what was technically sewer funds and what was technically storm funds. So we did our best guess. And so this is actually moving some of the ending fund balance from sewer over to storm. So when we go into the storm, you'll see it go the opposite way and bump up. So you'll see that on the next slide, but just for those of you who don't know and you see this little spike and then this huge drop.
We didn't go shopping.
No, we didn't go shopping. Sue, was there anything that you wanted to mention about the sewer fund overall?
Just at the wastewater treatment plant, we had originally scheduled a project this year, well, in the next fiscal year, to do some dredging in the primary lagoon, but because of the current conditions of the economy and a little bit of unknown going on right now, we are deferring that project, hopefully to the following fiscal year, 2021-22. So we don't think that that's going to have really any negative effect on anything, just to let you be aware that
Being cautious.
we're being cautious, and we feel that that is something that can safely be pushed aside for another year.
Sue, I have a question.
Sure.
Is it possible to elaborate a bit on a cascade tissue loading funds that we receive? Is there anywhere in here that reflects those expenditures or resources?
Well, that's primarily what you would see in the secondary fund, would be the costs that are associated with treating the discharge from the Cascades facility, along with what the city contributes to that from our primary lagoon. So the costs for operating that secondary fund are the ones that we split on that cost allocation, the one that we look at every year, and then the technical advisory committee for Cascades and the wastewater treatment plant, they bring that recommendation to the council, and we just have done that fairly recently, where they look at what the loading has been for the previous year and then make a recommendation on what percentage Cascade should share and which percentage would be contributed to the city. So we just made that minor adjustment a couple of meetings ago. I think it went from 78.6% to 78.2%, or it was a very, very minor adjustment. So
Are those monetary numbers reflected in our budget report here? I mean, I'm looking
So-
for the numbers on that. Where do I go?
That should be in the resource, but I don't know what line item that would be in the resources. Do you know
Okay.
where that's entered at, Matt?
So those are part of the first charges for services, the sewer service charges. The expense side, Councilor Morton, that is the secondary that we kind of create. That's Department 737, secondary treatment. So that is on page 61. So those expenses in the proposed on page 61 is what we share as a cost with Cascades.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Matt.
A question on other uses. If we have a new resident on the industrial property, are we expecting new residents who will be wet users or dry users, not affecting the lagoon or affecting the lagoon? Or have we made any decision on a third party using the lagoon?
Well, typically, if a new use, that's a good question. And usually any new use is going to have to go through our collection system. It wouldn't be something that the DEQ would allow us to discharge directly into the secondary lagoon like Cascades does. That was a very special permitted process that's been in place now for some time. DEQ actually was pushing back a little bit on that and wanting it to go through our collection system and through our primary treatment. But the way it is now is all permitted and allowed. But they've already made that, and that's not a hard ruling, but they've already made that determination to us that any new user on that property would have to discharge through the typical collection system and go through the pipes and go down to the primary the inlet there at the headworks.
So basically, it will be a dry user, standard sewer, as compared to a heavy user that would be discharging cooling or something like that.
Any type of user would have to follow that procedure.
Could any type of user put enough water in our system that cool their plant and allow our system to handle it? Would that be a
Oh.
reasonable to do?
Sure, yeah. So we have a vast capacity remaining in especially in the secondary lagoon system. Depending on how much a potential industrial user would be discharging, there may be requirements to upgrade some of the downstream trunk lines that lead directly to the headworks. But right now we have ample capacity to handle a large industrial user.
Okay.
Does that help answer that?
I was just wondering, because with a large cooling lagoon, it's almost like we have a machine, if you would, that if you need a large cooling facility for your industry, hey, we've got part of it, it's right next door to you.
Sure.
You have to go through the treatment plant.
Yeah, actually you bring up a great point. We do have in our sewer use regulations, in our ordinances, there are temperature restrictions. So even though what you're saying is that potentially an industrial user could discharge into our system and then utilize that facility that we have in the secondary lagoon to achieve their cooling, our rules don't let them discharge at certain temperature ranges. So they would still have to potentially, depending on what the industry was, they would still have to cool their discharge before it was released to us to get it within our operating temperature range. Because higher temperatures could really mess up the bugs that are in there and doing all the good things that they do.
My thought was that we have a facility called cooling, which is handling a large amount of fluid into the lagoon. Obviously, it was going to be hot, but basically we're just using, we'll say, a large amount of standard discharge because of the cooling limit for our system.
Right. That's yes. You are correct that the secondary lagoon does provide some cooling measures, but its primary function is it has a different purpose than actually cooling. So any industry would still have to meet our regulations as far as what they would be allowed to discharge in a particular temperature range.
Is there any possibility of having DEQ change the rating so they could jointly use the cooling lagoon for cooling? Or is that basically cast in concrete that that's a no?
I don't think anything's cast in concrete at this time. So I think that would be something that would have to be proposed to DEQ, but it would have to be permitted differently because our lagoon is not permitted as an actionable cooling facility.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, the only thing I ever wanted to mention about the sewer fund is the personnel services. If you look on page 59, I just wanted to point out the difference in this upcoming year on Department 735. If you look at the personnel services from last year, or I guess this current year, was at 703,000. This year it is at 490,000. That is part of that reallocation process of personnel services and benefits that Sue and her staff have worked on to make sure that we get a true cost allocation and update that from what it has been in the years past. So in previous years, we've heavily relied on charging the sewer fund for a lot of things because we used to have big industrial customers that obviously brought in a lot of money, helped pay for a lot of things. But since those are gone, we needed to go back to really a true cost allocation for those. So that's why you see those changes. The difference of that $200,000 you can go back and see is split among an increase in the street fund, water, and the storm fund. So it's split out a little bit among some of the other funds when we did the reallocation.
And the general fund a little bit for the
Correct.
some park employees.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to see that in the Parks Department here.
Yeah.
So. All right, so I'm going to move on to the Storm Fund. This is pages 62 and 63. So once again, a 5-year forecast. You'll see that little uptick, which is where we transferred that fund balance from the sewer fund. And then you see a steady decline in obviously these last 4 forecasted years of getting to zero and going negative. It's very important for the council and budget committee to understand that we will never get to this point. These are forecasted numbers. We will make changes probably this upcoming year and into the near future. I know Sue is working on an updated master plan that will update a lot of these numbers and forecasts and fees and all that kind of stuff to help fix this this potential issue in the future. So we are aware of it. We will never get to this point right here. Sue, can I hand it off to you to talk about anything in the Storm Fund?
No, other than, looking at this forecast and again, with the current potential financial situation, we did reduce our capital expenditure, our anticipated capital expenditure for this upcoming year. We know that storm is one of our main focuses as far as improvements go within the city right now. We have our own crews that are working on a lot of different little storm drain extensions, adding catch basins and extending main lines and things like that. But we're really working hard to keep those expenses down as much as we can. And we did reduce our capital expenditures for this coming fiscal year.
Any questions on the storm fund?
I did have a question.
Yep.
I'm still a little confused how we're going into negative numbers in fiscal year 22, 23
Yep.
through to 26.
So-
Does
so
that
I
mean that
can-
we're going to make money on it?
Well, for many years, the storm fund was kind of joined with the sewer fund. So the revenues that the sewer fund received helped mask what the storm fund was not receiving. And when I came in, I kind of fought a little bit to get these two broken out independently because for me, it was important that each enterprise is kind of serving its own weight, so to speak, and paying for itself. That is the purpose of the enterprise fund. So when we broke it out, you really saw that obviously the sewer fund was assisting with the storm fund expenses on a very heavy portion. So like I said, we will never get to this negative point in here, but it's a problem that we've seen over the last couple of years, and we've kind of pushed the can a little bit down the road over the last couple of years because we weren't 100% sure what the answer is. So hopefully what we're doing is we're going to finalize a storm master plan that Sue's working on this upcoming year, and hopefully that will identify some key aspects and ideas and changes that the city council will have to approve and make to make sure that we don't get to this point.
Saying though is that we're not actually making money then on that.
Correct. Yeah, the storm fees are not bringing in enough revenue to cover the storm expenses.
So Sue, can you reflect a bit on the upgrades that were occurred in several years ago with the Stormwater Fund?
Well, yeah, over the past 10 years, we've made a lot of improvements all throughout the city. We've, as mentioned, extended storm mains. We've put in storm systems in neighborhoods that previously had nothing, not a catch basin or anything. We've upsized some lines. We just finished the large Godfrey Park project a couple of years ago. That significantly increased the capacity of, I believe there's 5 trunk lines that dump into that Godfrey Park area. So it carries a lot of flow from probably 3/4 of the city and discharges it out to the Columbia River. That was a huge improvement, and we actually saw, as soon as that was completed, we saw a lot less in backups in the system, especially down in the middle trunk area. So we've done a lot of work and made a lot of improvements in that system, but there's still some areas that are underserved, and we still need to do some upgrades in order to get our capacity up to where it needs to be as the city expands. So thankfully, SDC fees will cover a lot of that, but as Matt talked about, that's what our master plans will help us determine is what percentage and what types of costs we'd be able to recuperate from SDC fees.
Thank you for reflecting on that. I hope that answers Bill's question about why that is, a portion of why that is receding.
I have a question to go along with that. Matt, maybe you can, I remember we talked about the same thing last year, maybe even the year before this, and you talked about that it was going to be handled by the town council. Do you you or the town council have any, can you give us any ideas about how this is going to be handled?
Well, I mean, at its most basic sense, you have three choices, right? You can raise revenue, you can lower expenses, or you can do both. So hopefully what I'm hoping for is that in the master plan, it will help identify, like Sue was mentioning, those projects that should and need to be completed, what percentage SDCs will be able to pay for those improvements. And then we'll also look at the operations of the storm fund and help identify maybe some key areas to look in or review and go over to see if there's a better way or more cost-efficient way to solve this problem. So we don't have a full answer and any key things identified as of right now.
Okay, does the budget through 24, 25 actually include the plans that Sue was talking about?
It does not.
Capital projects?
No, so the capital project plan in the forecast that you see is built on the capital improvement plan that you see in the budget book. And it does not go into any other capital projects other than what is mentioned in the budget book. Our assumption is that when the master plan is completed, that there will be additional projects listed. And so those new projects and those costs will be inputted into this forecast for next year's budget cycle, along with hopefully a list of solutions for the council to review and hopefully move forward on.
Okay.
Yeah, this is John Walsh here. And the other thing Matt didn't mention is the change in the billing policy as far as properties that weren't previously paying storm are now contributing to it. So
yeah, we did make a change. So customers like Walmart are now paying a portion. There are some other industrial companies that are now paying a storm fee that weren't originally paying. It roughly brings in about an extra $80,000 to $100,000 a year in revenue that we forecasted. But how we actually see that end up in the actuals is to be determined, because that was just changed. I think they just started getting billed for those back in January or February, I believe.
And we did do an increase on water about a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago. And we did water like 2%, I think sewer 2%, and then storm was 3%. Is that right, Matt? Does that sound about right?
Off the top of my head, I'm not 100% sure.
But I know we did bump the storm up because of the projection, and it still didn't make too much of a difference, but we did kick the can down the road about a year.
Yeah, it did kind of kick the can down another year so that we could finish up the master plan, and hopefully there's some ideas from there.
I did have another question.
I just want the budget committee to know that we are doing our job as far as watching this as well as time goes on.
I did have one other question regarding the stormwater fees. Are the fees determined by the amount of impervious surface on the person's property, or like you mentioned Walmart, by the size of the parking lot?
Yeah, really good question, Bill. For any non-residential use, that's absolutely correct. It is measured off of the square footage of impervious surface that's on their property. For a residential, just a single family home or a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, there's a fixed fee based on the ordinance.
Any other questions for the storm fund?
So that fixed fee also, it doesn't matter if it's a gravel parking lot, if it's old school, it's still got the fee in there, right?
For the fixed fees or for the residential uses, single family up to a fourplex, and then everything else all types of businesses, apartment buildings, anything else is all based on the square footage of just, it wouldn't count a gravel area, but any paved area, sidewalks, you know, roof areas, any hard surfaces.
With the amount of rock under this town, I think that's a fairy tale, whether it's paved or not. The water's gonna stay on the surface.
Okay, no other questions. We're going to go ahead and move on to the general fund. So this is a main graphic that I do mention in my budget message. If you did happen to read that, it starts on page 14. But I do kind of just want to go through and explain this for those who have not seen this graph before. Real quickly, the green line that is shown up here is the total revenue from the general fund. Red is the expenses. The purple bars are the ending fund balance. The yellow line is the 20% reserve policy that is set by the financial policies approved by the city council. The blue bar is the kind of internal goal of John and myself to get to a 30% reserve policy. Having, obviously, in times like this, having a larger reserve policy and reserves obviously makes times like this a little bit easier. So we've tried our best to formulate next year's budget. And you can see this green bar here that doesn't really mean anything up here, but down here you can see what the actual reserve percentage was for each year. So you can see in this proposed budget, we've gotten up to about a 25% reserve policy, and we remain about in the mid-20s for the next few years, hopefully. And you know, obviously, the farther out the forecast, the less predictable it becomes, but we do show 26 and 27% in the reserve policy and the ending fund balance going up, obviously, because you can see that difference between revenue and expenses in the future years. So the other thing to keep in mind is on this proposed budget and in the next year, I am expecting some higher than usual IT costs. I know I've spoken earlier about some of our improvements for the network of the city that has to be done. So some of those expenses are going to be coming out of the general fund, and they are shown in why this ending fund balance is going down from 25 to 23%, based on those kind of proposed estimates that I have for how much it's going to cost to replace our IT network. Are there any questions on this graph right here that I can answer? Okay, I'm going to jump forward into the general fund revenue. It's just over the next 3 slides. So this is mainly on pages 22 and 23. You'll see at the top of page 22 is a summary graph that looks similar to this. The proposed budget is right here. And then I've broken out categories over the next 3 slides. So for instance, this 2 million over here is this 2 million in local taxes. 647 here is this 647, and so on and so forth. So just a couple things to mention. Property tax revenue, I am showing at what the proposal came in from Columbia County. Usually when I get those estimates from Columbia County for property taxes, I can usually safely assume at least 3 or 4% higher than what they tell me. In the previous years, I've been tracking, I have history of about 10 to 15 years of actual history showing anywhere from about 3.5% to 5% increase over what the county actually estimates. So I feel this is a pretty moderate estimate for the proposed budget for property taxes. You'll also see some intergovernmental revenue taxes there. Those come from the League of Oregon Cities and what their estimates are based on our population and the revenue sharing from the state. You notice this year that I am proposing a budget with no money in here for grants. That does not mean that the city is not going out for grants, looking for grants, and most likely will get some grants, but I wanted to make sure to be conservative in what our budget estimates are. And so I am showing a budget with no grant revenue. If the money comes in, we will do a budget adjustment, add it in, and add the expenditure authority when those happen. But I wanted to make sure and be as conservative as possible. So that's why you see no grant revenue. Any questions on these first three sections?
You gonna change the date on that, Matt?
Oh, look at that. I will change that. Yes. That is, looks like one column I forgot to add it.
Made me speak up this meeting.
I
Way
apologize.
to go, Keith.
Okay, I'm going to jump down to the next section, which is charges for services and license permits and fees. Same story as before. I tried to be as conservative as I could with some of the estimates. You'll see a larger than normal increase in our general fund support services. That mainly comes from the reallocation of the enterprise funds and public works staff and park staff specifically. We've made a pretty good dent in the general fund, moving salaries and benefits for those parks employees and making sure that we show in the budget what the actual true cost as much as we can for the parks department so that we have those identified for any possible future changes. Pretty self-explanatory on the license permits and fees. As of right now, we are pretty well ahead of these adopted estimates in building and planning because they've been pretty busy. So you see I've increased a couple, I've decreased a few, but as of right now, we're still expecting things to keep humming along. So, but I wanted to make sure, of course, and be moderate, conservative in the proposed revenues. Any questions on the charges or licenses or permits?
No, the only thing that I'll say is that in checking in with Jacob, nobody's put the brakes on any projects that are in the process.
That is very true.
So there's no lightening up of work. He's staying very busy and we have a full schedule for May's meeting, so.
Yep, and I think I've discussed this before, but it is kind of nice in the state of Oregon. We usually tail behind whatever the country sees by usually about 4 to 6 months. So if and when the economy does really crash nationwide, it usually takes a little bit longer to get to Oregon. And also even within the state of Oregon, it usually takes a few months as for Columbia County to really see those impacts. So in that sense, we can kind of predict our future a little bit. It helps to our advantage. So here we show fines for mainly the court and library, miscellaneous revenue here, and then our fund balance available, which is our kind of our beginning fund balance that I'm predicting for this next fiscal year. You'll see last couple of years we've seen some pretty good revenue in our courts department. That mainly stems from some of the operations and changes that we've done in that municipal court, as well as getting collections done and sent off so that that can be processed. I think I'm being pretty moderate and conservative with the fines here for the proposed year. Obviously, court is operating a little bit differently than they have been, and with those changes, so I am expecting a little bit less in revenue from collections and people paying fees. So that is reflected here in the revenue. Interest earnings in previous years have been pretty good. The state pool account is only at 2% right now, which is kind of low compared to 3 and 4%. Sometimes it's gotten up there. But we do have a fair amount held in our pool account, so we usually get some pretty good returns on those. And then some reduced revenue for miscellaneous expenses. Nothing too surprising, I hope. Any questions on any of the general fund revenue? Okay. Might be done early tonight. Hopefully I didn't speak too soon. So general fund expenses. Those begin on page 26. You can find a summary of each department of personnel services and materials and services. And then on page 26 is where we start looking at the first, general fund department, administration department. The main change in that fund, and I can have John talk if he would like, but in personnel services, we've moved Rachel Berry's position over fully into the administration. So you'll see a little bit of an increase in that proposed budget. That is mainly the changes of Rachel Berry's position being expensed out of the administration fund. And 40% of her salary and benefits are being taken from the community development fund to help pay for her position. So that money is coming into the general fund, but her salary and expenses are fully being expensed out of the administration fund. John, is there anything you wanted to mention about your department expenses?
I think that was probably the biggest new thing. Other than that, I'd be welcome to questions. I think it's.
Any questions for John? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and move forward to the city recorder department. That's pretty self-explanatory and pretty standard from the previous year. Not many changes. Kathy, unfortunately, is not able to make it tonight. She is on a probably much needed vacation day. So I'm sure John can answer any questions if there are any for the city recorder department. Hearing none, we'll move to the city council department, which is page 28. Pretty self-explanatory there. You'll see that council funds were lowered down to $10,000 in anticipation of having kind of less discretionary revenue in the general fund. Obviously, the council can go over that and we can reallocate funds if it does need to make that change. That can be a city council decision later on in the fiscal year if they choose to increase those funds and move money from contingency over as needed. Are there any questions about the city council department?
I would just raise one issue about the discretionary funds. Got some criticism over being, as a slush fund of sorts, and we talked about renaming potentially to the community support funds, or something that was more like what it is, but we haven't vetted that with the council yet.
I would agree.
Good idea, John.
Councillor Carlson, are you okay with that name change?
Yeah, it's fine by me.
Councillor Locke?
Yeah, no problem.
Councillor Topaz?
It's just word merchant singing. Doesn't bother me one way or the other.
All right, sounds good. I will go ahead and you will see that change in the in the budget that comes to the city council.
Well, because that's exactly what it is, though, is when we have groups coming to us for 500 here, 500 there.
Correct. Yep. All right, in the municipal court department, not too many changes. Pretty much kind of status quo as has been in the past. You'll see that personnel services is a little bit up from previous year. That is because in this current year, we are actually only budgeting 1.6 FTE in the court department. However, that is mainly two employees basically, and that is splitting one person between court and utility billing. And so that person who has been splitting the position for basically since September, October, has been working full-time in court right now. So I am transitioning the full FTE from utility billing over to court. So there will be 2 FTEs in court as there has been in the past. So that is really just kind of a shuffle of funds from the finance department into the court department. Any questions on the municipal court department? Okay, we'll go ahead and move down to the police department. So that is on page 30 and 31. Brian, are there any changes that or anything you wanted to talk about briefly on the police department? I'm gonna unmute you here for a second.
No, just so everybody understands that just due to the nature of the work, it does seem high, the material and services, but we've come to the point where we have equipment that is mandated to be replaced to include tasers, body-worn camera videos, rifle-rated shields for the officers' protection. So that will all be purchased out of this materials and services. And, so we appreciate the support of the community and everybody on the budget committee as always. So that's all I got.
Any, let's see, I see Claire has a question. Why is there more anticipated overtime for admin services? Oh, Brian, do you want to talk about kind of the overtime issues that we've been running into?
Yes, overtime on the police department is inevitable. The old adage that if you hire more officers, it would reduce the overtime expense. That's kind of a misnomer. We have, we are short-staffed at St. Helens. Everybody understands that's the police department. And what occurs at times is that we have to, if somebody takes a vacation or an officer is sick, then we have to call in other officers to cover those shifts for overtime. Unfortunately, last fall, we had a major incident in the city everybody's aware of, where we had 2 officers that were off on administrative leave in lieu of a deadly force incident. And then we had FMLA issues where officers were out having babies. And so we had to go through a lot of overtime expenditures for that. So we do have checks and balances in place that we scrutinize overtime expenses. Every time it's used, it has to have supervisor approval. We look for ways to adjust shifts or other avenues that we can continue to serve the community at a less expense. But inevitably, overtime in the police world is going to happen. So we also cover the courts for the security for the bailiff position, 13 nights, the 4th of July, Halloween Town, all that, the Halloween parade, all those events cost us the overtime to staff those and ensure those go off safely. So that's all I have, Matt. Thank you.
Yep. And Claire, just so you know, the adopted budget for 1920 that shows $80,000, we are going to be well over that because of the incidents that the Chief Greenaway has talked about. So I think last time I checked, we were about 115,000, and that was back in February, March. So we won't be far off from that 150 even this year. So we'll do a reappropriation of funds at the end of the year to true up everything with the budget that the City Council will approve.
A quick question.
Yeah.
When your manpower is in court as a witness, is that overtime or is that straight pay?
That's overtime, Counselor. Anytime they go to court, they get paid overtime for that.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question. In past years, when they had a lot of overtime, it was usually a direct result of being short-staffed. And so although they were high on overtime, they were low on regular time because they were short officers. Is that not the case anymore?
That's still the case, Counselor. We still encounter, just run-of-the-mill staff in the police department. So yes, when we're short-staffed, the overtime usually goes up. But what we're seeing across the nation, not just here in St. Helens, I mean, this is no secret. The violence across the nation is fluctuating. The investigations take time. Take overtime to get the cases into the court system and put the bad people in jail in layman's terms. So, but yes, hopefully I answered.
I don't have all that detail, but a lot of times because we really need this many officers and we're doing it with 3 less officers. So it means we might have more overtime, but the total budget is actually pretty close to the same because we have
correct. Yes, ma'am.
Working. Okay.
Right.
It all works out in the money, but unfortunately, a lot of people have to put in some overtime.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just making sure for the people that haven't seen that explained in the past years. Thank you.
And then what happens is you take a risk of, if you do send somebody to boot camp and they successfully achieve it, they work for a little while and then they up and leave for a different city.
That's why we're always hiring. We're always hiring.
That costs us a lot of money.
And a lot of time.
Yes.
It's not an easy thing, and police work is difficult across the nation.
Yep.
Any other questions for the police department?
Just one. Are we still limited to just 17 officers?
Let's see.
Well, we actually have 13 patrol. And out of that 13, we have 2 vacancies. One is deployed in the military. So we have a total of 10 uniformed officers currently, 1 detective, 4 sergeants, the lieutenant and the chief. So that's our staffing levels.
So we're actually way under what's recommended for a city our size.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Eagle, yes, your staffing needs to be based on your calls for service.
So do you think that?
So staffing levels of the police department, no, it's not. I'll be honest with you. We need about 30 officers for not just a city of this size, but you have to look at the call volume. That's the big indicator of your staffing levels, is how many calls that your officers are responding to.
I'll tell you what, though, Chief, you've done a lot of adjustments that have been noticed as far as serving our community a little bit better. So kudos with what you have and what you're doing.
People are really happy that when they call, somebody comes. That's what
Thank you.
It all comes down to it. That's how the community judges you.
You are very welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions for police? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move over to the library department, which is on page 32. And before I let Margaret speak, I just want to go ahead and explain the larger than usual IT fund charges that her department is now going to burden. We went, just like we did a reallocation cost for public works for the crew, we did a reallocation cost for our IT services based on strictly the amount of computers, and even took the ShoreTel telephone system, divided it by what departments have each phones and how many people have phones. So we've done a complete recost allocation based on the actual expenses that we're seeing in IT services. So that is why you see such a large amount for the IT fund charges in the library department based on that allocation. Margaret, let me go ahead and unmute you. If I can find your name here. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about in the library department?
Certainly. I think the biggest initiative that the library is going to see in the coming year is the introduction of a makerspace in the other wing of the building. There was a large area that was relatively unused, and earlier this year the council approved the library making use of that space. And so in the material and services side of the budget, down at the very bottom, you'll see a line called Makers Lab. We're actually referring to it as the Makerspace, but it's being developed right now with some renovations, and we will expect to bring it online in the fall. It's going to be a home for the Make It program that our youth librarian has developed, and over time we expect to expand it to include access by all ages, and hope to add equipment there where people can engage in their own creation, whether it's do-it-yourself type activities or 3D printing or whatever. We're going to begin, though, by using it as a program space for our Make It program, and then go from there. So that Makerspace line there is a rental fee that we pay for the use of that wing of the building that is not currently occupied by the library. The Library of Things is the next line item, and that's a new collection that we introduced this year that includes a lot of the kind of equipment that's used in the Make It program, and it makes it available for checkout. And we hope to expand that collection, and it has things like 3D pens and robots for little programmable robots and science kits and hotspots and all kinds of fun things. So that's probably the most notable initiative for the library in the coming year.
Any questions over the library department or for Margaret?
No.
Okay, hearing none, so we will go ahead and move to final slide for the night. Talk about my department, finance department. Not too many changes here. You'll notice an increase in materials and services. That's due to a couple things, mainly the reallocation of the IT fund charges based on the equipments and computer use that I do in my department between finance and utility billing. You'll also notice an increase in bank service fees. I'm anticipating that for at least this next fiscal year as we start to finish transition into our new software program. We are currently using 2 programs right now, and that is also using 2 different credit card processing machines that I have to pay a lease on until the end of the next year. So between those fees, Springbrook fees and Encode fees, we're going to see an increase in bank service fees for probably about the next year or so until we finish a transition. We're waiting for the building department to transition away from Springbrook. They're moving to a state software, but that is not going to happen until I think June or July. So we'll continue seeing some higher than normal bank service fees. Are there any questions specifically for the finance department or me that I can answer?
I don't know if you answered this question. We still have that cash machine on the front of the building?
Yes, we do. Yes.
Does that make us money?
Not very much. Usually during October when there's a lot of people and they need cash to buy pies or anything at the booths that don't take a card. We do see a sharing percentage of those fees for the bank service. That usually is small enough that it just goes into miscellaneous general fund.
Okay, and then the other question, and I know that this is irrelevant today because bathrooms are closed. My understanding is we went into fee for showers at both locations. I just wanted that clarified to what we're doing there, because I know we've had some vandalism in the past, and that was part of the reason, in addition to the COVID, why the restrooms got locked.
I know the restrooms outside City Hall. Sue, can you speak on any other fees if they've been updated for the park showers?
For the fees?
I thought there was the showers at McCormick were coin operated or not, but somebody in the community told me they were not.
No, they are not coin operated, but we closed those after the camping was closed because that wasn't really, they were there for the old campground.
And so they're not turned on then when the—
No, they have not been.
The
Okay.
downtown one though is run on quarters.
Correct. The
There
one by
was
City
some
Hall.
confusion because I thought they were both coin operated, and then someone in the community said, "Oh no, they're free showers at McCormick Park." And it's like, I don't remember saying we were giving out free showers, but the fact that they're turned off tells me that we aren't giving out free showers because they're shut off.
Right.
Correct.
And we did that because people were washing their clothes in there and there was laundry everywhere,
That was one of the things that they were doing in there.
It was
yeah.
just causing a lot of waste and a lot of problems. We don't want just hours of hot water going down the drain. That's wasting taxpayer money.
It's amazing what goes on. It's amazing what goes on downtown late at night.
Yeah, and it's just, I just wanted to clarify that for the record, because I know that we had talked about having, just for safety and for vandalism, having things, the automatic locking doors, having
Yes.
coin operated things, just to try to curtail some of those costs,
Yes.
within the park department, instead of having that all come back to the general fund.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm just glad both Matt and Sue at the same time to get the right answer for my not answer.
Well, I'm sure you could have got that right answer from Sue without me.
Well, but now it's like it's official. I actually am crystal clear on the deal now, and I know how to answer it in the community.
And I guess I can officially tell you that that coin money from Columbia View Park Showers gets recorded into the general fund miscellaneous park revenue line item.
Yeah, it's not piles of money, but at least we're not paying for all the hot water down there. So
Right.
It's a lot of quarters to count, though.
And then as a side light, something I've noticed around town, I've noticed a lot of dumpsters and cardboard dumpsters getting full of garbage. And do we pay for dumpsters anywhere? And are those locked in between the garbage going out?
We do have a couple of dumpsters, but they're in like at the parks department, and we still have one down by the docks.
The one down by the dock, I see a lot of people dumping house trash in there.
And that's always been an issue. That's been an issue with all of the public trash cans that we have out around the city.
And it's required
Always
to
been a
have
problem.
that there because of the docks.
We have that there because of the docks, yes. Yeah. And that actually gets paid for out of the Marine Board funds that we receive every year.
And do we have the problem with people dumping trash in the ones by City Hall?
Not as much.
Okay, it came to mind because I've been volunteering at the chamber and they've been closed for a month and their cardboard can is overflowing out onto the ground with house trash. So it just made me realize where else do we have dumpsters that people are doing that? And
Yeah, the recreation has dumpsters on the outside of their building, but Shauna keeps them locked.
Oh, super cool. All right, I'm just trying in this time when people need to just be extra mindful about their budget and just watching every little bit. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. So speaking of the next fund is Parks Department. So Sue, I'll go ahead and leave you unmuted. Obviously, you see the increase in personnel services. That's almost $100,000 or so. That's from that reallocation to make sure that we start kind of recapturing or capturing what the actual costs are for that park staff as true as we can. Just in case the city council decides at any time to make some adjustments as far as doing any kind of proposed fee or cost recovery process for that. Sue, was there anything that you wanted to mention about the Parks Department?
Yeah, just very quickly, it looks like there's a large increase in the materials and services, especially under the operating supplies and the professional services line items. But what that really is just moving some typical annual maintenance out of the capital improvement plan and into the operating budget. And that was recommended by the auditors. So under the operating supplies line item, we've moved what we typically fund for purchasing replacement picnic table parts and benches, replacing and repairing benches, and also the playground chips. So all that was moved into the operating supplies. And under the professional services, usually every year we have inspection and minor repairs of our docks by a certified company that is able to perform those services. And that has always been in the capital improvement plan, but the auditors suggested that that just get moved into the operating expenses. And so you see that jump from the 25,000, or where did that go? Professional services, yeah, 25,000 to 32,000. So that's all for the 25,000 is what we usually pay for the community service workers, and also special services like having large trees taken down that our parks department can't do, services like that. But the increase is due to the dock inspection.
So I thought that everything with the docks was paid for by the Marine Board.
Well, it gets reimbursed out of that fund, but it's not directly paid for that by the Marine Board. But yes, that does get offset by those funds that we receive. That's
Okay.
correct.
Just making sure if we put the bill there, that we put the money there with it.
Yes, because I have to provide them a report every year that shows where their money is spent, and that is one of the items that we show them. You know, hey, we did this repair, we had the inspection done, and that's an easy one to justify.
Okay, just make
So the income that we receive from the Marine Board goes into the general fund and is reallocated then as an expenditure in the Parks Fund. I've
Right.
got to get this right. I'm tracking it in my mind.
Yes, that's pretty much exactly what happens. Yes, we get a fixed amount from the Marine Board based on the facilities that we have. It's been $16,500 a year that we get, and that is to cover all the expenses that we have associated with the dock facilities, the restrooms. That's the Sand Island restrooms, which of course we're not doing as much with those right now, but also it covers the half of the Columbia View restroom expenses there.
That's exactly what we will be. That's how we obtain on our lease agreement with the administrative part of Sand Island. We get those monetary funds coming into general fund as well. Is that correct?
Matt, I'll let you answer that.
I'm sorry, I was typing an answer to Claire on the chat. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, okay, so the monies that are allocated to the city with our lease agreement through the management of Sand Island, those monetary monies come into the general fund, is that correct?
That's correct.
Or do they stay in a parks fund of some sort?
So they go into a revenue line item for parks, but it is still in the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. If at any time the city council or Parks Commission wanted to make a recommendation or something to the city council could decide to move those funds to a more dedicated fund, like we would probably move it over to the Community Enhancement Fund, where we would track those revenues and expenses accordingly, separately from the general fund if you wanted to.
And that was the nature of my question, was the tracking part of that, because I've had in Parks Commission meetings, I've had questions coming up about how much is that revenue, how much was generated over a certain amount of time. So that's kind of the nature of the question.
Yep. If I can quickly give you another response to that, I would also have the Parks Commission keep in mind how much it takes to run the Parks Department. You may get a couple $1,000s or so from the parks from that service agreement or miscellaneous parks money, but as you can see in the budget, we're looking at $450,000 to operate parks, and obviously parks don't bring in $450,000. So you get an allocation of the general fund services, you get an allocation of all that general fund revenue. So unless we break it out and keep track of it separately, it's going to get kind of put into the general fund and out accordingly.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Sue or the Parks Department?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, I will go ahead and move forward. Next department is the Recreation Department, and I do see we have Shauna here, so I will go ahead and unmute her if she wants to speak. The one thing I do want to mention for the Recreation Department which is on page 35, you'll see the proposed personnel services is a total of $206,000. That includes Shauna's position as the recreation manager, as well as a 0.75 recreation specialist. That is a position that was approved by the city council last month, but we have not opened that position, and we do not plan to open that position until we kind of see where the future lies in recreation. So those salary and benefits will not be expensed for probably a little while until that position is hired. So I just want to make the budget committee and council aware that that is one of the positions in the proposed budget that we are keeping open, at least for the foreseeable future until the recreation program starts up again. Are there anything, Shauna, that you wanted to speak about?
I would just say in the next budget year, we will be having some more youth sports leagues. So we have soccer that's coming into play, and then we have our basketball program and some other youth sports. So we should see some more revenues coming in from those. And then we just recently had a partnership with the St. Helens School District Middle School providing services there. So I can see some of those things playing out too, where we help them manage their grants with different staff time.
Any questions for Shauna or the recreation department that we can answer? Okay. Thank you, Shauna. All right, so moving ahead to the planning department, and we do have Jacob on the line. I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you, Jacob, so you can speak.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Just two things there, jumping a little bit. One is public information. That is what we use to pay for legal notices or public hearings and stuff like that. It's also used for recording fees with the county clerk. The more activity that you have going on, the more stuff you have to provide notice for, and the more documentation that needs to be recorded. And then also, I think it was last year, there was a law in the state of Oregon that tacked on a fee to things recorded with the county clerk as an affordable housing funding mechanism. And so that increased those expenses quite a bit. So that's the public information. The other one that you'll kind of see the numbers all over the place is professional services. You know, it was for many years, it was only 3,000, and a lot of times we can stay under that. But then in fiscal year 14 and 15, it was close to 60,000. And that can be for legal counsel, which is a common use for it, or it could be used for private planning consulting or something like that. And it's inflated a little bit just to be safe and to have some cushion there for upcoming projects, things like housing code amendments and such. But that's all I really have to say unless there's any questions.
I'd like to build off Jacob's comments there as far as the planning department and the good work that they're doing. And, you know, the building planning, community development's just been, you know, just we're in a building phase right now, and it's really busy and doing a lot with a little. And what you don't see in this budget here is the work that Jacob and Jenny Dimshaw do on the grants and going after grants for community grants and securing. I look at Campbell, just the grant for Campbell Park was as much as the entire budget right there. So there's a benefit there. You don't see it on the expense ledger, but you do see it in community benefit of these spending this effort to go out and secure resources out to the state, federal, wherever we can get them, foundations and things. And so it's, you know, there's a lot that happens really positive in the planning department there. Planning precedes building. So when we know planning's busy, we know the building's likely going to be busy as well. And they're both really busy right now. The things like the community development block grant for the food bank, $1.5 million that the city secured. It does a lot of really good things for the community.
Any other questions for Jacob or the planning department?
The other thing is, I think it's new this year, is we added a half a person for them. Isn't that true? We added them 0.5 FTE.
Yeah, 0.4.
0.4. That has helped out a lot. I've just noticed things seem a little more organized, and that's just my overall impression from outside. I mean, they probably needed a person and a half, and we gave you 0.4. So,
well, It used to be 0.1, so I'm very grateful that it's now 2.4.
Yeah, they,
I mean, we're trying, you know, we're hoping that maybe that things will not be as bad as what they're forecasting, and we can revisit this after the first of the year, but, you know, better prepared and within budget.
And I meant to say 1.0, not 0.1.
Yeah.
yeah, the community development assistant, administrative assistant's been a real plus in really helping move things along in the department. One other thing I want to talk about is this year's budget is where the CCT allocation typically lives. And this year, you know, in the past we've supported them. Last year we didn't give CCT the 15,000. We gave it to some grants and things in partnership. But CCT was administering some tourism grants, and Salmonberry Lake get some funds for that. But there seems to be some change of energy with CCT, and they're really have their game on. So if there was I don't know that we need to do it here, but I would check back in on this issue throughout the year to potentially support the organization again.
Can we see that person?
We can.
The new person, maybe come give us an overview before we make a change?
Yeah, this is just the budget document, so yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you can make the change and decide to pay and support CCET anytime throughout the fiscal year. I will just do a budget appropriation at the end of the fiscal year to move money in to pay for that.
Yeah, I would just feel better if it was just all part of the process. I see, you know, just like anything with the COVID, everything's in flux. And that's why we have so much in unappropriated and so much in contingency, is so we can be prepared to react accordingly.
Yep.
So that's why we did it that way.
I know that John sits on the board, but it'd be nice for each city and county. I mean, I'd like to be able to interview a person for these type of positions. I mean, this is a big deal. I mean, 15 grand that we pay out, we were paying out is a big deal. For jobs, for business to come our direction, it's a big deal. I know the county was paying 50,000. I know Scapus was paying 5. So there's $70,000 by 3 different entities that I would be willing to pay even a little bit more if it was the right person.
Right. Definitely needs to be on the agenda.
For sure. Yeah. We have high hopes. So.
Yeah. Yep. I know you sit on the board, so but just throwing that out there. And John works under the direction of the council, and we all decided that a while ago. So
yeah.
Any other questions for Jacob, John, or planning department? Seeing none, we will go ahead and move on to the building department. So as it was mentioned, the community development assistant person, that person's FTE is split as 0.4 to building, 0.4 to planning, and then 0.2 to engineering. So that's mainly why you see those personnel services going up, is their share of that FTE position. I know Mike, our building official, does not appear to be online, but John is available here to answer any questions about the building department if there are any.
So still in that budget is still budgeted for a building inspector, right? Not an official building inspector.
No.
Why is that taken out?
It was taken out. It was not even included in this current year's budget.
Why was it taken out? I thought we had talked about it was a half-time, and then it rolled into another half-time, so we had a full-time.
It was. So we can add that position back in at any time the council wants.
We better do it.
I think
what be a city in St. Helens. We're not just what we get. Remember that. Not just what we get at the city. We're also serving Columbia City.
Correct, and we take a portion of their fees for that service.
I know, but so ours has went up a lot.
Yeah.
This year. A lot. I mean, if you go back and look in history, we had 3 building inspectors at one point in time.
Yep.
We have 1, a building official.
Correct. And I think John and Mike have had discussions about what the right way to move forward is. And I know they're working through some of the process changes. John, do you want to speak to any of that?
Yeah, I think that, my first comment would be I have no problem of amending this to include a half-time inspector. My caution would be that, just like some of the other unfilled positions that as we move forward through this downturn and see what it looks like, that we not fill it right away. Mike DeRoy is doing a fabulous job. He's, the county's wanting us to lean off of them to some degree. There's some things for electrical and commercial plumbing that we just can't do that, and they're okay with that. But, I think it's probably appropriate to do that.
Yeah, Rick, the city council can decide to add that position in at any time. So that's not a problem. And like John mentioned, it would likely be just one of those open positions, just in case something happens 4 or 5 months from now. But it's always open and available to talk. Any other questions specifically about the building? So the only thing remaining is the General Services Department, which is on page 38. Nothing too surprising here. Are there any questions about the General Services Department? You'll see we have a general fund contingency of a little over $1 million, which is a little bit higher than last year, but not out of the ordinary, but is definitely a large amount to make up for any potential changes that we may see over the next 5-6 months. Any questions on the general fund at all?
So the general services, what are you saying?
General services used to be called non-department.
Okay.
And that is where we see a lot of the services and expenses that are shared among the entire general fund. So instead of portioning out everything, 10% to admin, 10% to building, 10% to planning, all this kind of stuff, we lump a lot of things together, and that gets thrown into the general services department. So things like general office supplies that are shared among the office, insurance that is from CIS. So the general funds portion is that $110,000, and then the Public Works has another big portion of that. Facility maintenance for City Hall, those kind of things, those are all shared among the general fund as a whole. So that's what the General Services Department is.
So that's kind of like an accounting classification?
Yes. Yeah, the state of Oregon doesn't like me or any other city to call their non-department. So we had to think of another names to use instead of non-department. So a lot of cities are starting to go with general services.
Matt, I had one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I noticed that your budget's gone down about over $500,000.
Yes.
$500,000 less than last year. So
yes.
I'm why that's quite a substantial decrease.
Correct. So that fund balance actually goes back to the 2018-19. If you look on page 38, you'll see a transfer of $712,000. 500,000 of that was the transfer that the budget committee and the city council approved to go into the facility maintenance fund for park improvements. So I had to pull that money from somewhere that was pulled out of the general fund. And so that's the effect that you see of pulling those funds out. There was one question from Claire that I wanted to go over. Her previous question about overtime, I thought was about the police department, but it was about administrative services, which is the general administration department back on page 26. If you do look at that page, you'll see that the overtime for the Administrative Services Department was bumped up from this year's budget. Approved budget was $2,500. Next year, it's proposed to be $10,000. We are actually over that $2,500 mark right now, and that stems from our communications officer having to work so much. So that pays for that overtime for our communications officer mainly. So that's why you see the increase to $10,000. And then I see Claire had another chat question. Did the police incentive program just move into a different account, or are there no funds budgeted? So Claire, for that question on the general services, obviously you see the police incentive program. That's the bottom line item right before the total for materials and services. I purposely did not budget any funds for that, mainly because it's such a large expense. If there is an officer that does come in that qualifies for the program, money would be reappropriated from contingency at the end of the year to pay for that. The expense can still happen throughout the year in December or February or something like that. And that incentive is $25,000 for a police officer to move into Columbia County, and the city gifts that officer $25,000 to put as a down payment assistance for purchasing a house. So when and if that happens in the future, we would just do a reappropriation of funds at the end of the fiscal year. Are there any questions about the general fund or anything else in general? This is our last meeting before next week, where the only thing on the agenda is the approval or a short public hearing for state revenue sharing, and then the approval of the property tax rate and the proposed budget. So this is your opportunity, any council members or budget committee members, to ask any additional questions regarding the proposed budget.
I guess I have not really a question, but just kind of a surprise or kind of a comment.
Yeah.
With the exception of police, which I consider to be necessary workforce, obviously they can't just go home when they reach their 8 hours. We would hate them to do that. But I would hope that we would be deterring and dissuading from expanding overtime hours, and really, unless it's absolutely necessary. I would think that if somebody had to, just like you, Matt, I mean, I know that you're non-rep and your salary, but if you work 3 nights, the next day you come in late and you work to offset that we shouldn't be having staff routinely working 50, 60 hours.
Normally there isn't. I think, and John can probably speak to this better than I can on like the administrative increase to $10,000. Crystal works and has a lot of work to do. And she can't hardly take a vacation or anything. And she does end up working those long hours, and there's no time to really flex. So that's why we end up seeing that increase in overtime, specifically for the admin department. John,
do you think it will be less so this year because of COVID? Because obviously we're not having the same event load that we would have had in past years.
In her particular case, I don't think so. There might be more updates that she needs to help us release.
Well, and to some extent, I think it has to do with the comp time trap, where you work you work overtime and you take it as comp time, but it's earned at 1.5 times at the overtime rate, so you never really get ahead. And then you hit it. They can go up to 80 hours, so you bank up to 80 hours, and after that, then we're just paying in cash. And so when they do take the time off, then you're not getting the work done, and it's just kind of a vicious circle. But, and I don't know the foundation of the 10,000. It was just kind of a placeholder.
But just maybe, I mean, if we have to look at what a person's job is, that there's that much overtime anticipated, and what the expectation is, because we also don't want to cook people. If you make people work that many hours, they don't get any time off, and it's like, that's how people get sick. That's how they get burnt out.
Yeah, and that's kind of a vicious cycle too, because the city council wants there to be a lot, even more communication than there is already. And there's only one person.
Right. But I mean, you can look at what kind of communication she's able to do and what we're expecting, and have a more realistic picture.
And I think that's maybe part of the discussion that needs to happen, because there's obviously no one that's going to say that police are more important than parks, or libraries more important than police, or anything like that. So when she's doing press releases for the library or the police department, you know, obviously some of those have more pressing matters than others. And it's kind of a real dicey conversation as far as the council of what you think is most important. You know, obviously Margaret is doing some fantastic and great things at the library, but then we get police incidences that have to be done as well, and those we have to do both, so to speak, right now. And that, I think that's the feeling among the staff right now, is that we're kind of forced to do everything. Or Crystal's forced to do everything. And so she's working a lot more and working those hours. So I think a discussion in the future as far as really outlining what those priorities are for communications would be very helpful for that position. And so we don't incur some of those overtime costs. And so she can have a life outside of the city.
Right. I mean, it's not just her. I've seen other folks in there given 200% on a Sunday, 8 o'clock at night, and it's not just her. And we just need to make sure that we're staffing and having realistic expectations of folks.
Yeah, and I think outside of the police department, the administration department is really the only department that you really see an overtime influx. You know, Margaret, we put in a couple $1,000s of overtime into her budget, and that mainly comes from some instances that may come up where an alarm goes off and she's not able to come, so a staff member has to do that. You know, specifically in the building department, we've actually reduced overtime. Heidi used to work on Sundays and through the weekends to keep up with
I
everything.
wasn't going to name her, but
Well, I mean, she's one of those Sunday warriors for many a
Many
long time. So now that we've hired Christina, that's kind of lessened that burden, so to speak. So we have made some operational changes to reduce overtime. But I think the communications is probably the next discussion for council, and maybe during the next communications report with Crystal, that's a potential opportunity to have that discussion, so that she can better prioritize what we're going to do and what not going to do in the future.
okay.
Well, and I mean, if we're talking about communications, I mean, that's something that we didn't even used to do halftime. So now we've kind of made an investment, it's paid off. We've made a bigger investment, it's paid off. It's something that's kind of continued to grow. It's been integral to our you know, tourism program, and all the departments have really seen a lot of, you know, vitality from the work that the city does. I mean, some of our Facebook followings and also social media things are just, you know, size of city of Gresham and things like that. Our numbers are we punch well above our weight when it comes to communications.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
She's doing a phenomenal job. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And everything is equally important in my eyes, that we need to get that message out to our citizens. And everything is important. And I get that. So how do you have that discussion? I mean, Matt, you're proposing that we do this, and I don't even see how we have this discussion.
Well, we have it in a meeting and we involve Crystal in it because she's.
Well, I know, but so now my personality is going to conflict with yours because maybe I lean more towards one agenda than the other agenda. You know, who's more important? It's not good for team building. I can tell you that much right now.
No, and I understand it's a difficult decision, and nobody wants to have a conversation of what's more important than the other, because I think everyone agrees that each department is great on their own. So
what about this in the future amongst us outside of here?
Yeah,
it's because of team building.
Okay, and John was saying something.
Yeah, I was going to say that, you know, what we've been talking about internally, and Crystal's been part of that, is, you know, how can we support her to be more than give her the resources to do more. Talking with Margaret, talking with our government affairs, Rachel is supporting her to help, you know, make it even more than it is. So to take some of that burden away.
One of the problems that Crystal has is some of the stuff you can schedule, but some of it is time dependent, time measured in minutes. We really have to rethink how that department operates. because no other department has kind of, we'll say, the split schedule, the instantaneous versus the program schedule. And, you know, it's a peculiar problem, but she's very, very different in what she has to do because of the time requirements.
Well,
Not time when she's got to operate.
so her job is very difficult because sometimes it's very sensitive stuff, and it comes in at sometimes 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Like,
That's
be
right.
prepared. Be prepared. You might get a phone call for this, and here's what's going on.
Yep. And I think this is a good conversation to have probably at another meeting and not at the budget committee meeting.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
I agree.
Oh, yeah. So I'm just going to push the conversation aside a little bit. Are there any other questions relating to the budget? I don't see any. So Garrett, are you still on?
Signal, but I'm back on now.
Okay. Yeah, I've got you. So I don't hear any other questions. That was the end of the presentation. If you're willing to close the meeting, we can call it a night.
Okay, since we completed the agenda and there are no more discussion on anything else, the meeting is adjourned.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will send out a meeting invite for next week for the final budget committee and urban renewal meeting that we will have. So I'll send you guys some more information about that.
Hey, I still got daylight.
See you next week.